The kings of Lamayuru did not kneel. Not before enemies. Not before gods. Not before the pull of fate or the hunger of the wolf sleeping beneath their skin. Monte Davis had made certain of that. 11 years on the northern throne. 11 years of silence from the beast inside him. He had buried it beneath iron will and colder memory, the memory of a father undone by devotion, a mother claimed by a bond that should have protected her. He had sworn it would never be him. The court believed him. His generals believed him. Even his wolf, locked away in the dark of his chest, had stopped fighting. Then she walked through his gates. No rank. No power. A rejected omega with a broken past and quiet eyes, seeking nothing more than invisible work in a forgotten corner of his palace. She was not supposed to matter. His wolf had other plans. When the scent reached him, ancient, rare, undeniable 11 years of control shattered in a single breath. An alpha king Monte Davis dropped to one knee. The court went silent. Everything changed. Chapter 1. The Oath of a King. The northern wind never lied. It swept down from the Lamayuru peaks each morning without apology, sharp, unforgiving, carrying the scent of ice and pine and something older than memory. The wolves of the Northern Territory understood it as truth. What the wind carried you accepted. What it took you released. Monte Davis had never been good at releasing things. He stood at the high window of his war room, hands clasped behind his back, watching the territory spread beneath him like a kingdom holding its breath. Frost clung to the valley. The pack settlement below moved in its early rhythm. Merchants opening stalls, sentinels rotating posts, pups chasing each other between the stone buildings with no awareness of the weight their king carried above them. He preferred it that way. The eastern border dispute has been resolved, Austin Tafoya said from behind him. His beta's voice was measured, professional, the product of years learning to read Monte's silences. Ralph Campbell's men stood down before dawn. Campbell stood down, Monte said. Or Campbell retreated to plan differently. A pause. Both, probably. Then it isn't resolved. Monte turned from the window. Mark it as contained. Not resolved. Austin adjusted the report in his hands without argument. Gerald Taylor stood near the doorway, arms crossed, watching the exchange with the quiet loyalty of a man who had long ago decided his king was always 3 steps ahead. They were his closest, his most trusted. And even they did not fully know him. That too was intentional. He had been 9 years old the first time he understood what a mate bond could do to a powerful man. His father, King Aaron Davis, had been the most formidable alpha in 3 generations. Broad-shouldered, cold-eyed. The kind of man whose presence silenced rooms before he spoke. Warriors twice Monte's age had flinched under Aaron's gaze. The Northern Territory had flourished under his rule. Then his mother had gotten sick. It was not the illness that broke his father. It was the bond. Monte had watched from the corridor, small, silent, unnoticed, as his father knelt beside her bed and shook. Not in grief. In something worse. The mate bond, pulled taut toward death, had begun pulling pieces of Aaron Davis with it. His focus fractured. His decisions slowed. He began consulting her even as she faded, deferring to a woman who could no longer lift her head from the pillow, because the bond had rewired everything inside him to center her above the pack, above the territory, above reason. She died on a Tuesday in early winter. His father lasted 4 months longer. Not because of illness, because the bond had taken everything that made him a king, and without her, there was simply nothing left to hold the throne together. Monte had been 10 years old when he buried them both. He made the oath the night after the second funeral. No ceremony. No witness. He stood alone at the northern ridge, wind cutting through his thin morning clothes, wolf pacing restlessly beneath his skin, and he spoke it into the dark. I will not be undone by devotion. I will not hand my strength to a bond. I will not kneel. His wolf had howled once, long and low, as if mourning something it had not yet lost. Then it went quiet, and for 11 years it stayed that way. The court had built stories around his silence, as courts always did. Some said he had rejected dozens of potential mates, that fated bonds had approached and he had turned them away through sheer will alone. Others whispered that his wolf was dormant, weakened, that the Davis bloodline had finally thinned. A small few believed he simply had not met his match. Monte let them speculate. Speculation was useful. A king whose inner world remained unknown was a king who could not be predicted. He finished the morning briefing, signed 3 territorial orders, reviewed the patrol rotations with Gerald, ate the meal his steward brought without tasting it. Control was a discipline. Every day was practice. New staff applications arrived from the outer villages, Austin noted before leaving. Servant positions mostly. Kitchen and grounds work. Shall I process them as usual? As usual, Monte said, already turning back to the window. Austin nodded and left. The northern wind pressed against the glass, restless, carrying something Monte couldn't name yet. His wolf stirred faintly in its long sleep, then settled again. He thought nothing of it. He would not think nothing of it for much longer. Chapter 2. The Broken Omega. The road to Lamayuru was not kind to travelers. It wound through the northern passes like something that had given up trying to be a proper road, narrow in places, swallowed by frost in others, marked only by the worn grooves of cart wheels and the occasional cairn of stacked stones left by those who had passed through and survived. Most wolves from the southern settlements avoided it entirely. The Northern Territory had a reputation that preceded its beauty. Mitzi Smith had taken the road anyway. She walked the last stretch alone, pack slung over one shoulder, boots worn thin at the heel. She had learned not to mind discomfort. Discomfort was familiar. Discomfort at least was honest, it never pretended to be something it wasn't. The valley opened beneath her as she crested the final ridge, and for a moment she stopped. Lamayuru spread below in pale winter light. Stone buildings climbing the hillside in uneven rows, smoke rising from a dozen chimneys, the royal palace anchoring the skyline with the quiet arrogance of something built to last centuries. It was severe, unapologetic. Nothing like the warmer territory she had passed through. She found it oddly comforting. Warmth had not served her well. She had been 22 when Darren Cole rejected her. Not privately, not gently, publicly, in the center of their pack's gathering hall, with an audience that had gone so still she could hear the fire crackling in the corner. He had stood across from her with his jaw set and his eyes cold and spoken the words with the efficiency of someone completing an unpleasant task. I reject you as my mate. The bond is severed. We are nothing. She had not collapsed. She had not screamed. She had stood with her hands at her sides and nodded once, because she refused to give the watching faces anything more than that. But the bond breaking had been, there was no other word for it, catastrophic. Not in the way storms were catastrophic, loud and visible. In the way damage happened beneath the surface where no one could see it. She had felt something fundamental rearrange inside her chest, like a structure losing its load-bearing wall and slowly, quietly beginning to sink. Her wolf had never fully recovered. The partial shifts began shortly after. Where once she could move between forms with ease, something now caught and stuttered in the transition. Her wolf present but resistant, as though unwilling to commit to a world that had already made its opinion of them clear. Pack healers had examined her. Pack elders had consulted texts. The conclusion, delivered with the particular brand of kindness that was barely distinguishable from pity, was that the rejection had caused a fracture in the bond between her human and wolf selves. Defective, someone had said. Not cruelly. Almost clinically. The word had followed her ever since. She had spent 3 years moving between territories, never staying long enough to become known, never asking for enough to become a burden. She worked. She kept to herself. She slept lightly and traveled with only what she could carry, and learned the particular skill of becoming unremarkable in any room she entered. It was not a life that inspired envy, but it was hers and she had built it carefully, and she intended to protect it. Lamayuru had come to her attention through practical logic, not hope. The Northern Territory was remote enough that her history hadn't reached it. The royal palace reportedly employed outside staff without requiring pack allegiance. The work was physical and anonymous, grounds work, kitchen labor, the kind of employment that asked nothing of you except your hands and your silence. That she could offer. She was not looking for safety. Safety was a story others told. She was looking for quiet. A place to disappear into routine long enough to rebuild whatever resources she had spent on survival these past years. She did not intend to be noticed. She did not intend to matter to anyone. The palace employment office was staffed by a harried woman named Bess, who processed Mitzi's application with the efficiency of someone who had seen 100 like her, and formed no particular opinion about any of them. Kitchen and grounds work, Bess said, scanning the form. You've listed no pack affiliation. Unaffiliated, Mitzi confirmed. Bess made a note. King's household runs a clean operation. No trouble, no politics, no exceptions. She looked up once briefly, assessing. You understand that? Yes, Mitzi said. Bess stamped the form. Mitzi shouldered her pack and followed the directions given, keeping her eyes down and her steps quiet. She was very good at that. She had no way of knowing it would not be enough. Chapter 3: The Roar. The palace had a rhythm. Mitzi had identified it within her first hour. The way the morning staff moved in practiced patterns, the unspoken hierarchy of hallways, which corridors belonged to servants and which belonged to people who didn't notice servants. She had spent years reading rooms quickly. It was a skill born of necessity, sharpened by survival. She kept her head down and followed the rhythm. The senior groundskeeper, a stocky wolf named Bram, had assigned her to the interior courtyard first, winter maintenance, clearing frost-cracked stones, res-tacking supply crates near the eastern corridor entrance. Simple work. Invisible work. Exactly what she had come for. She was lifting the third crate when the door opened. She didn't know it was the throne hall entrance. She had not been given a full map of the palace. She only knew that the crate was heavy, that the eastern corridor connected somewhere significant, and that she had taken 3 steps through the wrong door before she understood her mistake. The room stopped her entirely. It was vast, cathedral-ceilinged, stone-walled, lined with the banners of the Northern Territory in deep charcoal and silver. Morning light fell in long columns through the high windows. A double row of court officials stood in quiet attendance along the walls. At the far end, elevated on a dais of dark stone, was the throne, and the man standing before it. She registered him the way you registered a storm, not as a collection of details but as a single, overwhelming fact. Tall. Still. The kind of stillness that wasn't peace but the precise opposite of it. The stillness of something that had chosen deliberately not to move. He was speaking in low tones to the broad-shouldered beta at his right when the door opened. When she stepped through it, he stopped speaking. Monty felt it before he understood it. A scent, cutting through the cold palace air like something that had no business being this far north, this unexpected, this overwhelming. Ancient. Clean. Threaded through with something rare that his wolf recognized before his mind could name it. His wolf did not stir. It erupted. 11 years of enforced silence detonated in a single breath. The beast he had buried, disciplined, starved of acknowledgement for over a decade slammed against the inside of his chest with a force that drove the air from his lungs. Every instinct he possessed, controlled, catalogued, locked behind years of deliberate practice, dissolved. His vision narrowed to the figure in the doorway. Small. Still. Holding a supply crate with both hands and staring at him with wide, uncertain eyes that were already calculating whether she could step back through the door without incident. His legs moved without his permission. He crossed the throne hall in silence. The court officials nearest him stepped aside instinctively. They felt the shift in him before they saw it, the way prey animals felt weather changing. Austin moved forward from his right flank, hand raised slightly, ready to intervene without knowing what he was intervening in. Monty stopped 3 feet from her. And then in front of his court, his council, his beta, his general, every watching eye in the throne hall of Lamayuru, Alpha King Monte Davis went to one knee. The silence that followed was absolute. Mitzi did not move. She was not certain she was breathing. The crate was still in her hands. She was holding it with the rigid focus of someone who had decided that if she simply did not put it down, the moment might not be real. The man kneeling before her was not looking at her the way anyone had ever looked at her. Not with pity. Not with assessment. Not with the particular careful blankness people used around broken omegas. He was looking at her like she was the only solid thing in the room. Terrified her completely. From somewhere behind the kneeling king, a voice, controlled, carefully neutral, broke the silence. Your Majesty. Austin Tafoya. The beta's tone carried the precise weight of a man managing a crisis in real time. Perhaps we might clear the hall, Monty said. His voice was low, steady, the voice of a man reassembling himself from the outside in. The court moved. Quickly. Whatever they had witnessed, none of them wanted to be present for what came next. Gerald Taylor was the last to leave. At the door he paused, looked once at Mitzi with an expression she couldn't read, and pulled it shut behind him. The throne hall held only 2 people, and the bond neither of them had asked for. Chapter 4: Denial. The official version was released by midday. Austen handled it efficiently without embellishment. A brief statement circulated through the palace staff and filtered down to the court. The king had experienced an unexpected physical response to an environmental trigger. It was being assessed. It was under control. There was nothing to discuss. No one believed it. But in Lamayuru, disbelieving your king and saying so aloud were 2 entirely different decisions, and most people were wise enough to understand the distance between them. So the court accepted the statement with straight faces and careful eyes, and the whispers moved underground where whispers were harder to trace. Monte let them go. Whispers had never concerned him. What concerned him was the Omega currently assigned to the East Wing Laundry. He had given the order himself, quietly through Austen without explanation. Mitzi Smith would remain in the palace. She would be assigned standard servant duties. She was not to be interfered with, questioned, or made aware that her assignment was anything other than routine employment. He framed it as monitoring. Precaution. The rational response to an anomaly that required observation before conclusion. He did not examine the framing too closely. What he knew was this: she had tried to leave. Within 2 hours of the Throne Hall incident, she had returned to the employment office, requested release from her contract, and presented herself at the southern gate with her pack over one shoulder and the particular composure of someone who had learned to exit situations before they could worsen. His gate guards had turned her back on royal authority. He had not gone to explain himself. He told himself that was also rational, that explanations implied obligations, and obligations implied a bond he had not accepted and did not intend to. He told himself many things in the hours following the Throne Hall. His wolf listened to none of them. She came to him on the 3rd day. Not timidly. That was the first thing he noticed, that she knocked on the door of his private study with the measured confidence of someone who had decided that if a confrontation was inevitable, she would be the one to initiate it. He respected that, distantly, the way you respected the architecture of something designed against you. "You need to release me from this contract," she said when he opened the door. He stepped back. "Let her enter." Closed the door behind her. "Sit down," he said. "I'd rather not." He looked at her. She looked back. Her chin was level, her hands still at her sides, but he could see the effort in it, the way she was holding her composure like something she'd assembled carefully and was determined not to put down. "You're not a prisoner," he said. "Then let me leave." "I can't do that." Something shifted in her expression. Not fear, she'd moved past fear he suspected a long time ago. Something more tired and more precise than fear. "You mean you won't?" He didn't answer, which was answer enough. She crossed her arms. "I know what happened in the Throne Hall. I understand what it means." Her voice was careful, each word placed deliberately, like she was navigating ground she didn't fully trust. "But I didn't come to Lamayuru for this. I came for work. Quiet work. I am not." She paused. Steadied. "I am not anyone's mate. Not anymore. I don't carry that the same way other Omegas do, and I won't pretend otherwise to make this easier for you. I'm not asking you to pretend anything." "Then what are you asking?" He was quiet for a moment. Outside, the northern wind moved against the study windows, low and persistent, the way it always was this time of year. "Time," he said finally. She stared at him. "Time. To understand what happened. To determine what it means strategically. To manage the court's response before it becomes something neither of us can control." She heard what he wasn't saying. He could tell by the slight narrowing of her eyes, the recognition that he had dressed something instinctual in the language of strategy because it was the only language he trusted himself to use. "You're afraid of it," she said quietly. He said nothing. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she uncrossed her arms and moved toward the door. "Then we have something in common," she said. "But fear has never kept me safe, Your Majesty." I wouldn't rely on it if I were you. She left. His wolf pressed against his ribs for the rest of the evening. Chapter 5: The Challenge. Ralph Campbell arrived at court on a Thursday. He came with 6 men and no invitation, which was itself a statement, delivered with the particular confidence of someone who believed their lineage purchased them certain permissions. He was broad, silver-templed, with the unhurried movements of an alpha who had never seriously been challenged and had built his entire identity around that fact. His pack held the Western Ridge Territory's old blood, old money, old opinions about how the Northern hierarchy should be organized. Monte received him in the formal audience chamber because refusing the audience would have been the more dangerous choice. You did not hand men like Ralph Campbell a grievance when they had already arrived looking for one. I'll be direct, Campbell said, before the pleasantries had fully expired. I'd prefer it, Monte said. Campbell's eyes moved, briefly, deliberately, to Austin, who stood at Monte's right. A territorial read. Then back. What happened in your throne hall has reached every pack within 3 days' ride. You understand that? I understand that information travels. Yes. Then you understand that how you respond to it matters considerably more than the incident itself. Campbell clasped his hands in front of him with the practiced ease of a man who had rehearsed this. An Alpha King does not kneel. Certainly not before an unaffiliated Omega with no bloodline, no rank, and a rejection mark on her record. The room held its breath. Monte held his expression completely still. You've come to remind me of my own conduct. I've come, Campbell said, to invoke the right of standard. The right of standard was old law. Ancient technically, predating the current territorial structure by several generations. It granted any alpha of ranking status the authority to formally challenge the fitness of a proposed Luna before bonding was completed. It had not been invoked in Lamayuru in living memory. Most wolves of Monte's generation had assumed it was ceremonial at this point. Decorative legislation from an era with different values. Campbell had clearly done his research. Austin's expression did not change, but Monte felt the shift in his beta's posture. The slight recalibration of a man updating his threat assessment in real time. The right of standard requires a formal declaration, Monte said. Filed with the council. Witnessed. Filed this morning, Campbell said. Witnessed by 4 council members who share my concern. He paused. This isn't personal, Monte. It was the use of his name, no title deliberate, that told Monte everything he needed to know about how Campbell had calculated this move. Familiar enough to suggest reasonableness. Precise enough to mark territory. A public trial, Campbell continued. The Omega demonstrates fitness. Bloodline assessment, physical evaluation, the standard measures. She passes, the challenge is satisfied. She fails. He opened one hand, a gesture of false reasonableness. Then the bond is formally unrecognized, and the matter is closed cleanly. And if I decline the challenge? Campbell smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. Then you appear unwilling to defend your own choice. Which raises questions about the choice itself. Monte dismissed him with the minimum courtesy required, and spent the following hour in silence. Gerald found him at the war room window, the same position, the same posture as most mornings, but something underneath it had changed. Gerald was perceptive enough to notice and wise enough not to mention it directly. Ted Wilson has been meeting with Campbell's men, Gerald said, setting a report on the table. 3 times in the past week. Before the challenge was filed. So it had been coordinated. Monte had suspected as much. Campbell was the visible move, old blood credibility, legitimate legal mechanism. Wilson was the architecture behind it, the political operator who understood that the fastest way to destabilize a king was to force him into an impossible position publicly. Defend the Omega and appear ruled by instinct. Abandon her and appear weak for having knelt in the first place. Either way, Monte lost something. She needs to be told, Gerald said carefully. Monte turned from the window. I know. She won't take it well. No. He picked up the report. Scanned it without absorbing it. She'll take it exactly as well as someone who came here to disappear takes being placed at the center of a political trial. He set it back down. Arrange a meeting. Private. Tonight. Gerald nodded and moved toward the door. Gerald. He stopped. Tell the council the king acknowledges the challenge. Monte's voice was flat. resolved, and that he intends to defend it. The decision, once spoken, felt less like choice and more like the moment you stopped fighting a current and simply chose your direction within it. His wolf, for the first time in days, went quiet. Not from suppression, from satisfaction. Chapter 6. The Awakening. The trial was set for the third day of the following week. The council chamber was not built for spectacle, but it had been arranged for it anyway. Additional seating brought in along the walls, the formal dais cleared and centered. The Northern Territory's legal banners hung with the kind of deliberate ceremony that told everyone present this was being taken seriously. Campbell had made certain of that. He had spent the intervening days building an audience, and he had been thorough about it. Mitzi stood at the entrance and took it in without expression. Monte had told her everything 3 nights ago. Clearly, without softening it. She had listened the same way she did most things. Still, careful, processing behind eyes that gave very little away. When he finished, she had asked 2 questions. What the trial involved, and whether she had any legal standing to refuse it. The answer to the second question had told her everything she needed to know about her situation. She had not slept well since. The proceedings opened with formality. Campbell's appointed arbiter read the challenge into the record. Bloodline assessment first. A council elder cross-referencing Mitzi's lineage against the Northern Territory's registered pack genealogies. She stood at the center of the chamber and answered the questions put to her in a steady voice, watching the elder's pen move across the page, watching the room watch her. The bloodline results came back inconclusive. Her maternal line was partially unregistered. Gaps in the record that Campbell's arbiter framed as suspicious and Mitzi understood as the inevitable consequence of a life spent moving between territories that didn't particularly want to document her. Campbell pressed the point. Unregistered lineage, he argued, indicated unstable bloodline. Unstable bloodline in a Luna-weakened pack bonds, compromised territory integrity, introduced genetic uncertainty into the royal line. He was clinical about it. Almost bored. The performance of a man making a reasonable argument. From his seat at the head of the chamber, Monte's expression revealed nothing. But his hands, resting on the arms of his chair, had gone very still. The physical evaluation was next. Standard measures, strength, endurance, the shift itself. Each component assessed and recorded. Mitzi moved through the first 2 with the quiet efficiency of someone accustomed to being tested, and finding no particular comfort in it. She was not weak. Years of transient labor had made certain of that. Campbell's assessors recorded the results without visible reaction, which told her the numbers were adequate and that adequacy was not what they were here to establish. Then came the shift. She had known it was coming. She had spent 3 nights preparing for it, not the way you prepared for something you were confident about, but the way you prepared for something that had humiliated you before and might do so again. She had stood in the small palace room assigned to her and practiced, and sometimes it came, and sometimes it caught midway and stopped, and she had breathed through both outcomes and told herself it would be enough. She stood at the center of the chamber now and reached for her wolf. Caught. The familiar stutter, the fracture in the bond between her human self and the animal beneath it. The wound Darren Cole's rejection had carved in years of displacement had never fully allowed to heal. She felt the shift begin and stall, her body caught between forms in the particular vulnerability of someone failing publicly. Campbell said something to his arbiter in a low voice. She didn't hear the words. She heard the tone. Something in her went very quiet. Not the quiet of retreat. The quiet of something shifting at a level below conscious decision, deep and structural, the way the ground moved before the surface registered it. 3 years of survival. 3 years of kept down grief and swallowed humiliation, and the daily discipline of making herself smaller so the world would leave her alone. Her wolf did not stir. It rose. Not with the stutter. Not with the fracture. It came from somewhere beneath the wound entirely, older than the rejection, older than the damage, older than anything Darren Cole's words had touched. It came with heat and force and a luminescence that several people in the chamber would later struggle to describe accurately. Silver-white, one would say. Like northern light, said another. The shift completed in a single seamless movement. The wolf that stood in the center of the council chamber was not broken. It was enormous. Still. Radiating something ancient that pressed against the walls of the room like a second atmosphere. The chamber went completely silent. Campbell's pen had stopped moving. Monte was on his feet. He wasn't the only one. Chapter 7: The Betrayal. The council named her bloodline on the 5th day after the trial. It took that long because the senior elder had to consult texts that hadn't been opened in decades, physical volumes stored in the archive's lower level, their spines cracked and their pages the color of old bone. What he found there required verification. What he verified required a second opinion. What the second opinion confirmed sent him directly to Monte's war room without stopping for his coat. The Varan line. Thought extinct for 3 generations. A bloodline so rare it appeared in the Northern Territory's historical record primarily as legend. Wolves of extraordinary power. Ancient pack magic running through their blood like a secondary circulatory system. Stabilizers, the texts called them. Wolves whose presence strengthened pack bonds, clarified instinct, anchored territory in ways that couldn't be fully quantified. Mitzi had listened to the elder's explanation with the expression of someone being told a story about a stranger. "You've carried this your entire life," Monte said, when they were alone afterward. "I carried a rejection and a fracture," she said. "Whatever this is, it was buried under that." He didn't push. But the information settled in him with a weight that felt less like knowledge and more like the final piece of something clicking into alignment. The political landscape shifted within 48 hours. Campbell withdrew from court without formal announcement, simply departed, his 6 men behind him, no statement released. The challenge was technically satisfied by the trial's outcome, and Campbell was shrewd enough to recognize that pressing further would now cost him more than he'd gain. He had come to expose a weakness and instead illuminated a strength. Men like Campbell knew when to leave. Ted Wilson did not leave. That was what concerned Monte. Wilson had been quiet since the trial, conspicuously quiet, the particular silence of a man recalculating rather than retreating. He attended council sessions. He offered no objections. He smiled in the right places and said very little, and Monte watched him the way you watched whether you didn't trust. "He's still meeting with outside contacts," Austin reported on the evening of the 6th day. "We've identified at least 2, both from beyond the northern border. Harkin territory. Harkin." Monte kept his expression neutral. "Names. Still working on confirmation." Austin paused. "The meetings are being conducted off-pack land. They're careful." "They're careful," Monte said, "because they know we're watching. Which means they've already done what they needed to do." Austin understood the implication. He left to double the perimeter sentinels. Mitzi disappeared on the 7th day. Not slowly. Not with warning signs Monte could later identify and regret missing. She was present at the morning groundswork rotation, Bram confirmed it, and by the time the afternoon patrol swept the eastern quarter, she was gone. Her room was undisturbed. Her pack was still there. Her boots, worn thin at the heel, were beside the door. She had not left. She had been taken. Monte felt it before the report reached him. A sudden, specific wrongness that moved through him like cold water. His wolf lurching upright with a violence that buckled his focus mid-sentence. He was in the war room with Gerald when it happened. Gerald caught the shift in him immediately. "What?" "Find her." His voice came out flat and absolute. "Now." The council convened within the hour. 3 members, Wilson among them, argued for restraint. Crossing into border territory without confirmation risked triggering a larger conflict. The Varan bloodline was valuable, yes, but a king did not destabilize an entire territory over one individual, however significant. Chapter 9. The Luna of Lamayuru. They returned to the palace before dawn. The sentinels spread the word quietly. The king was back. The Omega was with him, both unharmed. By the time Monte and Mitzi crossed the palace threshold, the household staff had begun to stir, and the court would not be far behind. Word moved faster than people in Lamayuru. It always had. Monte let it move. He was done managing the narrative. The council convened the following morning at his request. Not Campbell's schedule, not Wilson's timing, not the measured pace of men who believed they controlled the board. Monte's request, Monte's hour, Monte's terms. Ted Wilson was present when Monte entered. Seated, composed, giving nothing away in his expression. He had learned, somewhere in his political education, that the man who appeared least concerned was often the most dangerous. Monte had learned the same lesson and applied it differently. He took his seat at the head of the table, and let the silence run for a long moment before he spoke. The right of standard has been satisfied, he said. The Varan bloodline has been confirmed and recorded. The challenge is closed. He looked at each council member in turn, unhurried, direct. What happened at the Harkin outpost is being documented in full. Every contact, every meeting, every piece of funding that moved through this council without authorization. He stopped at Wilson. Every name. Wilson's expression didn't break. But he was very still. Treason requires evidence, Wilson said carefully. I have it, Monte said. Simply. Completely. The council chamber held the kind of silence that preceded a verdict rather than a debate. Wilson was escorted from the building before the session closed. Quietly, efficiently, with the minimum drama, Austin's preference, and Monte agreed with it. Public spectacle served no one here. What served Lamayuru was resolution, and resolution didn't require an audience. Chapter 8: The King's Claim. They crossed the northern border at dusk. Monte moved ahead of the others, not by order but by instinct, his wolf pulling him forward with a certainty that made conventional tracking feel slow. Austin and Gerald kept pace behind him, 6 elite sentinels fanned in formation, none of them speaking. The territory changed as they moved deeper into the borderlands, the familiar frost-hardened ground of Lamayuru, giving way to something wilder, less managed, the kind of landscape that reminded you the world existed before pack law and would exist after it. The trail was consistent, deliberate. Whoever had taken her wanted to be followed at a specific pace, slow enough that distance accumulated, fast enough that the trail stayed legible. A controlled lead. They wanted Monte present when they arrived. That told him the abduction was not an endpoint but a setup. He ran faster. They found the Harkin outpost 2 hours past the border, a stone structure built into a hillside, the kind of place that had been used for border negotiations and was now being used for something else entirely. For armed wolves at the perimeter. 3 more visible at the entrance. Harkin pack marks on their shoulders, but the configuration felt contracted, hired structure, not loyal formation. Wilson's work. Assembled with someone else's money. Monte took the perimeter in silence. Austin swept left, Gerald right, sentinels moving into position with the practiced coordination of men who had trained for exactly this. There was no discussion. The plan was the same as it always was when the stakes were absolute. Move precisely, move completely, leave nothing unresolved. The perimeter dropped in under 2 minutes. She was in the interior room. Not restrained. That was the first thing he registered. His wolf cataloging her status before his eyes fully adjusted to the low light. Seated on a stone bench, back straight, hands in her lap. Across from her stood a broad alpha he didn't recognize, mid-40s Harkin insignia. The posture of someone who believed the room still belonged to him. 2 more wolves flanked the alpha. Both shifted to defensive positions when Monte entered. King Davis, the alpha said. The tone aimed for composure and landed somewhere near it. This doesn't need to be. Monte crossed the room. The alpha moved to intercept. Monte's wolf came forward. Not fully, not the uncontrolled eruption of the throne hall, but something more deliberate and therefore more dangerous. The controlled release of 11 years of disciplined power, focused into a single point. The alpha stopped. The 2 flanking wolves stepped back. Mitzi, Monte said, without taking his eyes off the Harkin alpha. I'm not hurt, she said. Her voice was steady. He felt something in his chest loosen fractionally. We're leaving. I'm aware. The Harkin alpha found his footing then, or the appearance of it. The Varan bloodline is a territorial resource. Pack law precedent from the Third Age grants custodial rights to. Show me the precedent, Monte said. A beat. Show me the living council member who will stand in Lamayuru and argue custodial rights over my mate to my face. His voice was completely level. I'll wait. The room held. Then Mitzi stood. She didn't move toward Monte immediately. She turned first to the Harkin alpha, and something in her bearing had changed from the woman who had walked into the palace seeking invisibility. The trial had done something. The awakening had done something. She stood with the full weight of the Varan bloodline behind her, not as a shield but as a simple fact, and the alpha across from her felt it. I am not a resource, she said quietly. I am not a bloodline asset or a territorial advantage or a legal precedent from the Third Age. She held his gaze without effort. And I am done being moved around by people who see only what I carry and not who I am. She turned and walked to Monte's side. He looked at her for one moment, something passing between them that required no words and had been building since a throne hall and a supply crate and a bond neither of them had chosen. Then he took her hand. The first time he had touched her. She didn't pull away. They cleared the outpost in formation, Austin and Gerald closing behind them. At the borderline of Lamayuru, Monte stopped, turned to face his territory, his court, the landscape that had been his alone for 11 years. Then, with every sentinel watching, he raised Mitzi's hand. "Luna of Lamayuru," he said. Loud enough to carry. Not a question. A declaration. His wolf at last went still, not from suppression, not from discipline, but from something it had not experienced in 11 years. Completion. Chapter 9. The Luna of Lamayuru. They returned to the palace before dawn. The sentinels spread the word quietly. The king was back, the Omega was with him, both unharmed. By the time Monte and Mitzi crossed the palace threshold, the household staff had begun to stir, and the court would not be far behind. Word moved faster than people in Lamayuru. It always had. Monte let it move. He was done managing the narrative. The council convened the following morning at his request. Not Campbell's schedule, not Wilson's timing, not the measured pace of men who believed they controlled the board. Monte's request, Monte's hour, Monte's terms. Ted Wilson was present when Monte entered. Seated, composed, giving nothing away in his expression. He had learned, somewhere in his political education, that the man who appeared least concerned was often the most dangerous. Monte had learned the same lesson and applied it differently. He took his seat at the head of the table, and let the silence run for a long moment before he spoke. "The right of standard has been satisfied," he said. "The Varan bloodline has been confirmed and recorded. The challenge is closed." He looked at each council member in turn, unhurried, direct. What happened at the Harkin outpost is being documented in full. Every contact, every meeting, every piece of funding that moved through this council without authorization. He stopped at Wilson. Every name. Wilson's expression didn't break. But he was very still. "Treason requires evidence," Wilson said carefully. "I have it," Monte said. Simply. Completely. The council chamber held the kind of silence that preceded a verdict rather than a debate. Wilson was escorted from the building before the session closed. Quietly, efficiently, with the minimum drama, Austin's preference, and Monte agreed with it. Public spectacle served no one here. What served Lamayuru was resolution, and resolution didn't require an audience. The formal recognition ceremony was held 3 days later. Not elaborate. Monte had specifically requested against elaboration. Mitzi would not have wanted it, and he had, somewhere in the past several weeks, learned to factor in what she would and would not want. The Great Hall was dressed simply. The Northern Territory's senior elders were present. Austin and Gerald stood at the front of the gathered court with expressions that walked the careful line between professional composure and something considerably warmer. Mitzi stood beside Monte in the center of the hall. She wore no ceremonial costume. She had declined it, politely but clearly, and Monte had not argued. She wore deep gray, clean lines, nothing borrowed from anyone else's idea of what a Luna should look like. She had her own ideas about that now, and they were better. The senior elder read the recognition into the formal record. The Varan bloodline acknowledged. The mate bond confirmed. The title of Luna conferred upon Mitzi Smith of no previous pack affiliation. And that last part, Monte had made certain, was recorded exactly as stated. No affiliation erased. No history rewritten. She had earned her standing without belonging to anyone. That was how it would be documented. When the elder finished, Austin stepped forward first. He went to one knee, the beta's formal pledge, old ritual, absolute in its meaning. His eyes, when he looked up at Mitzi, held no reservation. Gerald followed. The same movement, the same directness. Behind them the court followed. Mitzi stood very still through all of it. Monte beside her watched her face rather than the room, watched the careful composure she had spent years perfecting hold for a long moment, and then quietly release. Not collapse. Release. The way you put down something heavy you had been carrying so long you had forgotten it was not part of you. He looked forward, said nothing, gave her the privacy of the moment within the public one. Later, much later, when the hall had emptied and the palace had settled into its night rhythm, they stood at the high window of the war room together. The northern territory spread below them in darkness and frost, the pack settlement quiet, the peaks beyond it catching the last edge of moonlight. The same view Monte had stood at alone for 11 years. The same wind against the glass. You could have left, he said. After the trial, the political threat was resolved. I had no legitimate reason to keep you. I know, she said. You stayed. I know that too. He looked at her. She was watching the territory below with the particular attention of someone learning the shape of something new, not with longing, but with the quiet intention of a person deciding where they belong. I'm still afraid of it, he said, the most honest sentence he had spoken in 11 years. So am I, she said. That doesn't seem to be the point. Epilogue. The king who had sworn never to kneel did so again on the morning. His Luna was formally presented to the full northern territory. Not in the throne hall this time. Outside, on the open ground before the palace, with the wind coming down from the peaks and the entire pack assembled in the frost-hardened valley below. He knelt willingly, deliberately, one hand over his heart, the old gesture of devotion that his father had made and that he had spent 11 years refusing. His wolf was not silent. It was for the first time in memory simply at peace. Mitzi placed her hand briefly on his bowed head. Not performance, not ceremony, just contact, just truth. And then she looked out at the territory that was now also hers. She did not make herself small. She did not look for the exit. She stood in the northern wind and let it carry her scent across the valley, and the pack below lifted their voices, and Lamayuru, cold, unforgiving, ancient, answered back.